Hi Legionnaires, I'm Omegon Edge and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be painting a power sword, but I'm also going to be focusing on blending and light placement as we take our first steps into non-metallic metal. In this video, I'll show you how easy it is to achieve a convincing blade so your minis can stand out on the battlefield. Now, one of the most tricky subjects to tackle in painting is non-metallic metal, and it's a very difficult subject both to do and teach. So rather than trying to cram things into a short 20-minute video, I thought I'd start by giving you some fundamental topics in an easy to digest way to help you get started. First up is value, and specifically value scales. Understanding value is one of the most important aspects of painting. You can have wonderful colours on a model, but it won't matter if your values are bad or in the wrong place. So, what is value? It's really broken down to how bright and how dark an object is, and can be used to describe value contrast. So here I've actually made a value scale, and it's a good way of learning how different values can be applied into a model. Now these scales come with different names, but they usually range from between 5 to 10 levels of value, with black being the darkest and white being the brightest. Learning how to use these values, but then breaking them down into memorable chunks is an excellent way of practicing placement on your model. Remember though, the value of a highlight will depend on the material and the colour you're trying to achieve, so use common sense. Okay, so here we have a sphere, and I've labelled it as a way to help you understand how light hits objects and responds to the world around it. Our highlight is what our object looks like in direct light, and the midtone is our object's value outside of direct light. Then we have the shadow, which is what our objects look like outside of direct sunlight. We have our terminator, which is where our light meets our shadow, and it's then followed by our rebound lights, which are coming off different objects in the world. Last up is a cast shadow, and that's for very advanced painting, but it will come up in the future, so best to take note now. So for this tutorial, I looked up several references of swords and blades to use as a case study. I find that looking at artwork is really helpful because although it's a 2D plane, the same issues that artists face can be applied to 3D art, with the exception of recreating materials from different angles. In the end though, the best advice I can give you in this area is to look at real life objects, as that's what 2D artists are looking at, and your growth is determined about how well you're able to observe the world and the objects around you. So, become a good observer. With that being said though, here's a couple of swords. Now remember, light travels in a straight line and bounces back at us, which is why objects that have a reflective material create strong beams of light across them, and that's consistent with the image here. We have our highlight color, which is a super white beam, and then we have a very quick transition to shadow followed by rebound light before going to deeper shadow again. That's consistent with everything I've mentioned before, so now you can see it how in real life objects it actually takes place. It's not only the fast transition and high contrast that makes an object appear shiny, but it's also the rebound light, and this is an essential part of making a model seem reflective. Now, I know that was a lot, but thanks so much for being patient with me on this theory stuff. I think it's really important to cover the why as much as the how. Do let me know though if you find the theory helpful, and if anything's unclear, please be sure to ask me in the comment section below. Alright, on to the mini. So first things first, onto the glass palette. I'm working with the Scalecolor Floww oil paint range, and that's because the colours are very vibrant and dry very matte. Normally I use artist grades, but if you don't have those, you can use these as a cheap alternative. The colours you use for painting this sword don't really matter, you could even use white and black, but by using complementary colours and mixing those together, we can achieve a really chromatic grey, making it perfect for non-metallic metal. So my first aim is to mix the red and cyan together in a 50-50 mix in order to get a nice neutral grey. Taking time to play with the colours in this way helps us to find variation between the hues we create from this mixture, but you don't need to stress about it. Your main aim is to create a darker value which we can use for our shadows, When we add scroll white and titanium white to this mixture, we will create a warmer or colder grey depending on how much red or cyan you added. We can use these to become our midtones and highlights for our power sword. I also have red Muav and moist soul. Both of these colours are from Scalecolor and I'm using them to add variation, but these are totally optional colours. I then start by mixing my scroll white and titanium into this mixture, which will give us our highlights for the bright end of the sword. The last part of the preparation is our prime glaze, and this is an essential element of my technique. The prime glaze is what allows our paint to appear smooth and crisp, reducing the chance of brush strokes appearing and adding a horrible dusty texture to our models. So be sure to practice this. So I actually recommend priming your model with a grey primer or a pre-shade. I didn't get around to doing that, so I just used Violet Grey from Scale 75. Once you've done that and the acrylic is dry, the next step is to apply our prime glaze over the area of the sword we're planning to paint. Once that's done, we can apply our high mid-tone to the sword. We can then dry brush this away to remove any excess paint and prepare it for our next layer. So here I'm going in with my highlight and I'm just blending that over that area we just dry brushed. And then I'm going to go in again with my dry brush and blend this away. Or rather blend it into our mid-tone, which I'm doing here. So it's basically a repeat, but practicing on a small space like this on a flat surface is a really effective way of learning how to blend. It then becomes about where we place our lights and shadows, and you can see I'm just kind of softening out the blends I created from those previous layers as they start to dry. Painting this way actually makes the paint dry really quickly, so we're not having to wait a long time, and it means we can actually paint over layers in a faster way rather than having to wait over days for something to dry before we can do it again. So there I've just applied my shadow and I'm blending that over into our mid-tone that we created previously. I'm also adding in a dark shadow next to our brightest area, and this is what creates that contrast I've mentioned before, and I'll paint that over, I'll blend that out myself with my dry brush. I then added in some deeper shadows into the mid-tone area, and I'm just blending those out with my dry brush. And it's all about soft motions, soft strokes as I blend, and I'm trying to keep my brush flat against the surface, otherwise I end up scratching paint away. Here I'm just adding in a bit of a higher mid-tone into those lower areas to create some contrast there, and these will become areas for my rebound lights. So I'm just blending those out softly and just making sure I'm not scratching the surface, again keeping my brush really flat. And there we go. So that's the result of the first steps that we've done. And again, it's just as the paint dries, you'll start to see areas you can blend, so just keep blending as you go. And then I'm just going again in with my dark shadows to just reinforce those areas. Every single time you blend, you'll notice that the color becomes slightly more desaturated. So if you want to keep that saturation, only blend the areas that you want to smooth the transition of. If you want to keep it really stark and vibrant, then just don't blend those areas. But for this sake, again, this exercise is all about blending. So just take your time and just blend the areas that you need to. Here I'm adding in my really bright highlight again, so this is like the highest value color we have, and I've added that to the top, and now I'm going into the same areas with the same value into those rebound lights. But the key here, the key difference is as I blend it, again you can see them slowly start to lose that strength and that saturation. But the area at the top, I do want it to be really strong. I'm only going to blend the edges so I can keep that area that we created before really bright. Here I'm just adding in another section that I wanted to make sure that it stays really bright again, and now I'm just adding in those rebound lights, just reinforcing what we did before. And then blending them again. So a lot of oil painting is about just adding layers. We're still layering up as we do in acrylics, it's just done in a very different way, and it's all about blending, smoothing, and knowing when to stop. And understanding value is really important for this. And my highlights are getting slightly smaller each time I'm going in, and just reinforcing the previous work we did. Knowing what to blend, knowing when not to blend is a really important part. But hopefully you guys can see where those light placements are and how I'm just reinforcing them, thickening them out. So on the other shape, I'm just creating another highlight. This is quite bright, and this is for where the shape of the sword turns and bends upwards. So I've just applied a highlight over that area, and then I'm going to blend it and smooth it out so it's not as powerful as the light at the top. But now that we've got that light area and that dark area so close to each other, we create that contrast. And you can see as it goes closer to the bright area of the sword, it's getting darker, and that's just to make sure that we create contrast where we need it. But we're trying to repeat what we've done at the top, at the bottom, and we're just being careful to leave areas where we can add those highlights in. So this part is like just really simple. Just keep your shadow areas really thin, and then when you go in with your bright areas, you can just make sure you blend them together. So here I'm just removing all of those dark areas, or just blending them out. And now we're going in with our highlight again, just to reinforce the blending we did, and look how powerful and strong that is as we go over to those areas. And then again, we'll just blend these together, keeping it really smooth. So I know this can look like quite a difficult technique to do, but as you practice it will get simpler. And I'm going over to other areas which became, I could see the transition becoming stronger between them, so I'm just smoothing those out. As the paint dries, it will start to reveal itself to you. So yeah, it just requires you to go around the model and adjust. And here I'm just adding in the paint for the lower side that we painted before with our pre-glaze, and I'm just gonna blend those areas together using my dry brush once it's actually ready, and I'm just adding that reinforcement of my shadow in. Now you can see it's simply a repeat of what we had been doing on the higher side. It's just using a lower value. And now I'm just adding in my highlights again, just making sure it stays bright. I'm even going stronger. The paint has had like about 5 minutes to dry at this point, and I'm going in just reinforcing those bright lights again. And as I start to smooth them out, I'm keeping my brush strokes even smaller. I'm not going on as many times as I had before, and just make sure that the paint stays really vibrant. And then we can finish off just by adding in our edge highlights. We can use the tip of our paintbrush for this, or we can use the side, Using the tip gives us a bit more control. The great thing about highlighting with oil paints is that it blends as we do, and this is why oil paints are excellent for highlighting and hard edges. You might hear a lot of the time people say that oils are not good for hard lines. That's complete nonsense. It is. They are brilliant for hard lines. You just have to understand how to manipulate the paint in order to achieve that. And you can see me just adding in that contrast to those areas, brightening them out. But every single time I add a new layer of paint, I need to dry brush it out, and this is what allows us to add in extra layers on top of them, so just smoothing those areas out. The last step is to add in a pin wash, and just by filling our paint, we can add in some oil paint and it will slowly start to go into those crevices. Now I actually recommend doing this manually, so just leaving your paint a little bit thicker than a wash, just so you can apply it in, and this just gives us a bit more control and is also good for practicing how to create hard lines. So you could thin it out and then apply this in, but this just allows us to just do it with a bit more control. And there is the completed blade. So hopefully that was enjoyable. Hopefully that's been really easy for you to understand, and if you've got any questions, feel free to ask me. Oil painting requires a lot of practice, especially if you're coming from acrylics, but as you can see, as long as you practice, you'll be able to create a great variation of different colours and non-metallic metal, and this is a really good entry before we move on to our next section for more complicated work. So hopefully you enjoyed that video, team. Please let me know if you have any questions. I know that oil painting can look really challenging, but it is really rewarding as long as you practice. And hey, this is all about learning. We're going to learn together. And if you've got any feedback, feel free to share with me. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.